Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Fifth Trooper podcast and Notorious Scoundrels podcast. We are reporting in live from LVO, and today we have a very special guest, Luke Eddy, one of the game developers of Legion. How are you doing, Luke?
I'm doing good. It's awesome to be here. It's awesome to be at LVO. Let's see, this is the day after the tournament. It was awesome, and I'm excited to be on your podcast. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. It was really interesting that you were there, and it seems like you're a huge supporter of these events. What's your favorite part about going to them?
So I've been at Gen Con and I've been at LVO now, and more than anything, it's just seeing this many people playing Legion, and having a great time. It's a lot of fun to work on the game, but you don't always see the impact, of the game when you're just in your office, trying to come up with, or not even designing something, but it's some menial task, like, oh, you're right, yep, got to do this today. But then actually going out and seeing people playing it, enjoying it, and really loving it, it's really a great, morale boost, and it's awesome to see it. Really, that's the best part, is seeing people actually playing it and enjoying it.
Yeah, so when you were walking around yesterday, was there any list or game or any moments that seemed pretty impressive to you or stood out in your mind?
I was pleased to see that one list, Kingsley's actually, had a FD tower in it, which is pleasant to see. I think every single unit was represented, which was fun. There was, I think it was, who was it who had the ballsy Luke play where he jumped out to kill the to take down some fleet troopers who had picked up the middle crate on
that was David, my co-host David.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Ooh, nice plug for the podcast.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, shout out to him. That was and then Luke survived for most of the game then, so that was impressive. That was a good play there. You gotta play the objective, even if it means possibly sacrificing your commander. If it's the game, you gotta do it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think there's just so many different options when you're playing the game, and as the rounds go down, you start seeing how the game's going to unfold, and sacrificing a commander is definitely one of those options to get the win.
Or early too. To make a play like that early and know that this may determine the whole game. I have to do this now. Yeah.
So I guess we'll start with, for you, what's it like personally to take something like Star Wars and be able to work on it and take things in units and make them into this game?
It's honestly, it's just a lot of fun. It's no secret, I hope, that people who work at FFG are just huge nerds, and we really like Star Wars. So it's just been an amazing privilege to work on a Star Wars game and to work on shout out to Alex Davey, of course. The rule set he designed for Legion is great as a sandbox to work in, and you can do so much thematic stuff with the rule set and with just a miniatures game in general. Miniatures game is an amazing platform for doing Star Wars. It just makes sense. So it's a lot of fun, and it's awesome to see that sort of merging of theme and mechanics come together so well so often too, and to get the feel of these really cinematic things and these heroes and villains and vehicles and things to feel like they do in a movie in a game. So it's very satisfying.
Yeah, and so I guess could you walk us through some of the process of it? For instance, I was reading there's 34 people that are listed in the book, in the rules book, that worked on the game. How does that all fit into the process? And what's a normal day look like?
Sure. Well, so a normal day is hard to define because it can be totally different given what stage the project is on. I appreciate, pointing out there's so many people who work on a game. I think people sometimes expect there to be more developers designing for a game and fewer, other people working on it. But in reality, it's just a few developers. It's Alex and I and a whole army of other people, because we have, a graphic designer, Evan Simonet, who's awesome. And sometimes we have to pull in a second one. We have multiple art directors who are coordinating with dozens of freelance artists. We have our sculpting team in house, multiple sculptors, plus the sculpting manager Derek Fuchs, and really awesome people working on this game. And yeah, it's a long list of credits. It's a lot that goes into a game. So I have the privilege, honestly, of working with all these cool people. So on any given day, I might be coordinating with the art director, and we're talking about like, what might need to be tweaked about this art piece that a freelancer is working on, or I may be talking with the graphic designer. We're talking about like what, graphical elements we're going to need for an upcoming thing we're working on. Perhaps it has a new token or it needs a new template, something like that. Or I'm talking with sculpting, and they're showing me what they're working on, and mostly I just tell them that what they're doing is awesome, But every once in a while, there's some little Star Wars detail, we try to put a lot of research into what we're doing. We try to, because we want to represent it thematically, but we also want to be, correct and, have things equipped with the right gear, elements like that. So a lot of us sort of absorb a lot of Star Wars knowledge, and there's a lot of good, cross-pollination. Different people in our office have, are maybe resident experts on some of the TV shows and stuff. So we'll pull them sometimes for questions. And so, yeah, my day-to-day changes a lot. And obviously, as a developer, I spend most of the time doing design work. But a lot of it is also, we have a lot of play testers. So, reading playtest reports, getting feedback from those testers. I don't, unfortunately, just sit around playing games all day.
So you mentioned like bringing stuff to life from other sources other than the original trilogy. How do you like decide? What goes into that decision? Like, obviously, there's the stuff from the original trilogy. Some of that's low-hanging fruit. Like, you got to have Luke, you got to have Vader. But there are things also that are great in the game, like ATRTs and Wookiees, Sabine and Busk, that may not be like central characters from the original trilogy. How do you what goes into the decision to bring those units in?
Well, so I can't go into too much specifics, but I can say roughly that a lot of it is coming to a consensus. And I think we had some directives that we all were like on board with. Of we want to represent the original trilogy first and foremost to get the game going, make it look like Star Wars on the table, and then start branching out. There was more. There's more original trilogy stuff we could have done and still will do, but we wanted to get Rogue One in there. Because it's so... Rogue One is what Legion is, almost more so than the original trilogy in terms of, like, on-the-ground battles between, troops and stuff. Rogue One's awesome. And I think part of why we did it, and part of why you're also, like, seeing Sabine is we want to just kind of let people know that, like, that's where we're going. Like, do you have a favorite Star Wars thing? Like, just hang in there. There's a good chance we'll get to it eventually. There's so much we can do for this game. And, honestly, if we could just design and release everything, at once, that'd be great. It'd make so many people happy. But, there's so much content and people have so many favorites that, it may take a while for us to get to your favorite Star Wars character or vehicle or thing like that. But we did want to, sort of like add in elements that weren't just the original 3 movies to sort of cue people in that, like, that's the scope of this game. So yeah, and in terms of like actual very specific things, it's coming to a consensus with what the people who are involved in the game want to see in the game, and sort of a balance too between just honestly what's cool and mechanically to what we want to introduce. We've tried to fill out certain ranks that's been sort of a driving decision or directive. I don't know what's the word I want to use. I don't know. That's sort of just driven a lot of the choices we've made more broadly. And then within a particular rank, we sit down and are like, all right, what's the coolest thing that's that rank? So that's roughly kind of how we do it.
So one of the things that I love about Legion specifically, like just as a Star Wars fan, is how the theme, when you're playing a certain unit, it feels like that unit. Like, for me as a Rebel player, Luke feels like Luke as I'm leaping around the battlefield, and like Vader, really feels like Vader. What goes into like sort of fitting that theme and matching a unit's abilities and stats and everything to like how they're perceived in Star Wars lore?
Yeah, well, I would say what helps with that is the rule set that Alex came up with has a lot of knobs and levers to adjust. So there's a lot of things you can tweak to sort of push that theme with each character. The keyword system is great. There's a lot of use we can get out of each keyword because it's not just game text on a card. It's a word that we can, say like Sabine, for example. We have Gunslinger on Han Solo. That's perfect for him. We came up with it for Han. And then when I started working on Sabine, I was like, wow, that's her jam too, So I can just pull that from Han Solo, put it on Sabine, sort of Frankenstein together characters, but then also look for like, what defines this character? What's something unique? And that's when we come up with a new keyword that's something that's representative of what's special about that character. And, we'll sometimes try to make those keywords somewhat generic enough that down the line when we have another character that's like, oh, that's their jam too, we can reuse that again for another character as well. But no, it's a good rule set for just bringing out a lot of Star Wars theme. And I think, as far as perception, like things feeling like Vader or the unit feeling like Luke, I think there's just enough of a suspension of disbelief, so to speak. For example, like a regular trooper unit has 1 health per mini, whereas Luke Skywalker has 6. It's not like Luke is 6 times beefier than a normal man, but there's still that perception that like Luke is a hero, and he should stand out like that. So, you sort of fudge reality, so to speak, to service the theme and the feel of the game that people expect.
Plot armor.
Yeah, plot armor. It's a whole lot of plot armor.
Those Rebel characters especially have some good plot armor.
Yes, they do.
Well, and I guess to speak to that, we can mention this. With Sabine coming out, the sculpts are also kind of going into theme, and now there's going to be maybe some options with the sculpts as well.
Yeah, so that's something that, honestly, we've wanted to do for a while. I can't give any spoilers, but like suffice to say, like we are always improving. It's not too much to say that like, we're learning as we do this. Our sculpting team is a group of amazing guys, and what they do just keeps getting better and better. And so like the multi-part minis with Sabine and Boss, that's a step in a direction that we want to go. When we got to those characters, well, I should say, when we got to Sabine, it just made sense. She has an iconic helmet. She's a Mandalorian. You got to have that on there. But it would be cool to do her likeness, too, in sculpt, And then similarly, of course we were going to do the Darksaber, and that would look badass to have on a mini. But from the get-go, I wanted it to be an upgrade so that you could sort of represent Sabine at various stages of the season of the TV show, various seasons of the TV show, because she sort of evolves as a character, and you see that in her equipment as well. She sort of accrues more equipment as she goes. The sculpt in particular is her from season 4, so you'll see like she's got the extra like shin guards, and the van bracers are the ones she gets from Fen Rao. So he and the jetpack too. So he chose the season 4 look for her armor, but a lot of her upgrades are sort of, if you strip them away, that's sort of maybe season 2 Sabine. And so that gives people, a way to be like, oh, this is the Sabine from my favorite season, or to, just in terms of gameplay, tailor it to how they want to run Sabine. Sabine with a Darksaber versus Sabine without a Darksaber are very different. So from the get-go, we wanted that to be an element of her character, and with the Darksaber being not necessarily a given, it made sense to have 2 different sculpted options for her arms as well. Give her both guns if that's how you're running her, or give her the Darksaber if that's how you're running her too. So after doing that then, we were like, well, we don't want the Imperial players to feel left out. Boss doesn't really have any other gear. So we sat down, we thought about it, and I don't know if, I suppose people have noticed that there's a few extra tokens in that spread. Not going to say what they do yet, but suffice to say, he may throw a grenade or 2 that may not be so nice to stand near. But since he can do that, we're like, all right, hey, that can be one of his other options. Hucking a grenade and holding the gun in one hand. So yeah, and I think we're going to look to doing more of that in the future.
Yeah, and I guess in that same kind of token, the command cards also play a huge part in the feel of each character. And one in particular that we were pointing out was Chewie commands cards are so interesting in the way that he's a true sport character. So do you, in that process, is that looking at the character and what they do from a thematic standpoint and then trying to figure out how that works in the game? Or is it, okay, we need this type of a mechanic in the game, who's a good character that would do that?
Yeah, well, so something like Chewie's command cards, which I'm glad you mentioned, because those were a lot of fun to do. That's one of those, in that case, it was before even getting to designing the stats of the unit, I was like, that's what I want to do. Chewie's like the ultimate support. He's the super friend, or he glues the super friends together, so to speak. And it was just a cool riff on, sort of Boba Fett's cards, where Boba Fett is like, well, he's the operative, not a commander. It's all about him. He's not going to support anyone else. Each of his command cards only activates him. So having each of Chewie's pair with a different hero was a nice riff on that, where, it's still him, but one other guy. But in terms of deciding on mechanics like that, definitely I think it's sort of the character we want to do that comes first, or unit type. And like I said before, we do sort of look to what a faction sort of needs next in terms of rank or unit type. Maybe they need another vehicle. I mean, the Occupier tank and the Land Speeder are going to be, well, they're spoiled now, so they're going to be coming out at some point here. And, designing those were part of all right, we've done enough special forces now, and we've got a couple supports. We want to return to heavies. So in that respect, we sort of decide, what slot needs to be filled. And then from there, like I said, it's a decision of what character is coolest. What character do people want to see in the game? What character do we want to see in the game? Sometimes it's what character do we have ideas for already? And then at that point too, then we start to do sort of all right, what brings some balance to the game? Maybe what role does this fill that's lacking, in terms of maybe it's a long range option that's not there. Maybe it's a anti-trooper option that's not there. But of course, all that can blur together a little bit too, So it's generally on a case by case basis.
So with that, when you're developing these characters and these units, so how do you approach the point system for them, and how's it determined and assigned?
So to start off with, in designing something and even the initial testing of something, points don't matter. And as part of getting the theme right, we make the mechanics first. We need to make Chewie feel like Chewie. We need to make Jin feel like Jin. We do that first, and then we look at, all right, well, what should this cost? When you put all these elements together into one character, then we say, all right, what does this come out? We ring up all these keywords at the cash register. How much points does this person cost? And we have a rough ballpark then, and and then we refine that. We either say, oh, it's getting too expensive, maybe we'll cut this, or we say like, oh, it's justified, we'll raise the cost, lower the cost, whatever. We have our testers help with that. They give feedback on points, costs, and stuff. But the thing is theme matters so much because it's Star Wars that making a character feel like the character who they are in the film, making a vehicle or something feel intimidating, or have the right board presence is really important. And then we go from there with points.
So in your testing, what is the role? So I'm personally mostly a Rebel player. I love me some Rebels.
Good.
What would you say is the role of Rebels from a faction, development perspective? And we're starting to see some keywords diverge here a little bit that might be faction specific. Like, are there things like that with Rebels that we're going to see over time kind of coalesce around their faction identity?
Yes, and I can actually, I think, answer two questions at once here with the Imperials and the Rebels. I don't know if people are familiar with the sort of card game player breakdown, the Spike, Johnny, Timmy system. You know what I'm talking about? So, and for listeners, I shall expound. But it's used generally for like CCGs and stuff. It's been around for a while, and it's the idea that there's generally three types of players, and they overlap. But Spike is the player who is all about efficiency. They're in it to win it, so to speak. And then you have Johnny. Johnny is playing the game as an expression for him. He's gonna find those combos. He's all about that jank. And then you have Timmy, who he wants to see big splashy things. He wants to make a big impact on the battlefield or in the game, or sometimes just crush his opponent. So generally, a lot of games will look at we want to appeal to all these different play styles. We're not just making a whole game for Spike. It's not just all raw efficiencies. We're also not making a whole game just for Johnny, where it's all these crazy, weird combos and synergies and things like that. And we're also not making a whole game just for Timmy too. Timmy doesn't generally make sometimes the best decisions in terms of lists or decks or things like that. So you can take these different card players and really apply them to almost any game. And so for Legion, it's not a one-for-one exactly. There's definitely blur, but both factions we try to have be competitive. So both factions have elements that appeal to the Spike player, the one who wants things that are efficient, that get the job done. Their stats are just a little bit ahead of the curve, or they sort of are a jack of all trades, solid choice. Not going to have high variance type of thing. But then for the Rebels, it skews just a little bit Johnny, so to speak. There's just a little more comboing going on, a little more synergy. Chewie's a good example, obviously. You look at Chewie and you're like, you probably don't want to, run him and two other commanders just to get his command cards in. Luke, Han, Chewie is getting a little bit expensive there. But hey, man, if that's your jam, if that's what you want to pull off, by all means, do that. Use those synergies. And then for the Imperials on the other side, it does skew just a little bit Timmy sometimes. A good example of that would be Palpatine, which I'm glad. It's awesome that Palpatine is seeing play. There's Palpatine at LVO. If you play him right, he can make a huge impact on the battlefield. So some Spikes, I imagine, out there are playing Palpatine, but who's designed a little bit for the Timmy player. Where it's like, this is a huge splash unit. I can like have a massive influence on the battlefield with this one guy. The and now you will die turn. Where Palpatine blows himself up to wreck the board. That's kind of for the Timmy player. And like I said, it sort of blurs, but that's a little bit of the approach you've taken. And then more specifically, there are things like the Imperials, you probably noticed, get a little more range, generally speaking. Not a whole lot, but a little bit more over the Rebels. Obviously, there's the red die, which allows the Rebel players to be a slightly more reckless, I think, actually. And it doesn't make them more defensive. It actually makes them a little more offensive in some ways. Whereas the Rebel player with that white die needs to play a little more defensively to keep guys alive, and just sort of taking dodge tokens to stay alive, and then relying on the better attack dice. And then suppression, too. The Imperials tend to put out a little more suppression, whereas the Rebels sometimes mitigate it a little better. Or in the case of Jyn and Pathfinders, like, actually want it. Like, please, yes, give me some more suppression. So yeah, there are definitely sort of different mirrors that we are conscious of, and we wanted to feel distinct too. So like you said, there are keywords that are on one faction's units that you honestly may never see on an Imperial unit, and like we do a very specific like this is an iconoclast unit. For example, you have Sabine on the Rebels. Like, I mean, she's there's very few Rebel units with that red armor save. I mean, just Luke and Sabine, I think, might be it. And yeah, it's two. And and Sabine gets the surge on defense too. Like that's very iconoclast for Rebels. That's not their thing, but it makes her stand out. So like we will cross something will cross factions. It'll jump to another one sometimes, but generally speaking, we wanted to feel distinct. We wanted to feel different. So there are sort of rough boundaries that we do try and maintain to make them feel different from each other.
So with all of that, has the community surprised you in any way as far as the list building of any combos that, not that you guys didn't see, but maybe you didn't think would be as strong as they've become?
So my absolute favorite list that people came up with is Sorry About the Barbecue. I mean, and was that yours? Did you name that one?
I don't know if I came up with the name, but I definitely popularized the list.
That was your brainchild, so to speak?
I wouldn't go that far, but...
Well, points to you, sir. And whoever came up with the name, too, that's great. And this is a tangent now, but I do really like the names that people have come up with for various lists. I think Wonder Twins and Super Friends were kind of a low-hanging fruit. Those were gimmies. We actually called them that in testing, so... No, Sorry About the Barbecue is great. That was it's not some like weird unintended, combo, but, using that 0 pip on Hans, but then the HQ uplink to actually have it be something else that's going first and doing a clutch play is great. That's the community came up with that. And Kyle came up with that.
Like I said, I don't know that I invented it, but I, definitely popularized it. So.
Yeah, so that's a great example of like, this sort of like strategies that sort of emerge and stuff. And I mean, as we release more and more stuff, like we're making a sandbox for people to like discover those in, and to experiment and do cool stuff like that.
So with that, what's your favorite list to run? I'm gonna give you two options. So one for fun, and then when you're like have to test the game.
So,
or are those both the same? Is running for fun and testing the same?
Not quite the same. You're in a different mindset certainly when you're testing. Although, actually, maybe I should walk back on that because Alex and I do when we play together tend to get a little competitive. So we do try to beat each other when we play. So maybe it's not quite so different. Testing though is you definitely are doing. It's a little bit of a different mindset, of course, because you're doing a lot of like, you may even have despite trying to beat each other, moments where you're like, well, I don't know if this is the optimal play, but like I want to do this and see how well it works, In terms of like what are my favorite lists in testing, man, Jin Pathfinders are a ton of fun. Like her and the Pathfinders hunkered down near the middle of the board, just eating suppression for days and not dying is hilarious. That one's a lot of fun. My favorite list testing though was Krennic and one Death Trooper and 3 E-Webs and 6 units. I can't tell you what they are yet. So stay tuned. There's some good synergies coming out. I'm excited for those guys. And then for fun, I just like throwing anything on the board. Really, I play the game a lot, testing it, and so like if I'm going to play it casually, like at that point it's just like it's kind of whatever. Like in testing, you're so far ahead of where the game actually is that you're actually a little bit removed from what's competitive. I think it's safe to say that don't be under any illusions that like designers are the best people at a game, because you're, like I said, testing your brain space is in a different mode. Whereas someone who's like playing like what's out right now and just playing that over and over and really refining that strategy, like they're probably honestly better at the game. You're doing something differently when you're designing, and especially when you're playing a playtest game. So when it comes to just playing, outside of playtesting, like honestly, I love playing it with people who are just getting into it. And I can just throw whatever on the board. I'm not worried about winning. I'm just helping learn the game. Like that's a ton of fun. Those are the sort of games that I play outside of trying to test the game. So honestly, though, it is awesome to like be at an event like this and see these really high level like competitive players, because it's cool to see what they can pull off too. Like actually, going back to like lists and things that were here, Nick Freeman's triple Scout Saboteurs list was pretty hilarious. I was glad to see them on the table. I was glad that what he was doing wasn't, was still janky. That wasn't like, oh, that's the new meta now. No, but it's awesome to see those guys out there on the board, the Saboteurs. So, I don't know. I rambled a little bit, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. You mentioned Wonder Twins and how that's what you called them in testing. Obviously that's a build that you played, the two of them together in testing. Were they like designed to work together like that, or was that just sort of a natural evolution of their abilities?
If you look at our releases, you can probably identify sort of pods of units that sort of have similar themes or connected mechanics. Obviously, all the Rogue One stuff plus the Land Speeder, we worked on those kind of simultaneously. So Jin and the Pathfinders have a lot of synergy with each other. There's definitely intentional synergies like that we work through. But it's as we release more and more stuff, it becomes more and more of a sandbox for people to find maybe somewhat unexpected synergy or combos or tactics and things like that.
And similarly for Empire, Veers and Boba Fett get run a lot together. Is that something also that you guys did, like in testing, or is that something that's evolved since? And they don't have the same kind of direct synergy that Luke and Leia do, but they certainly complement the other Empire units well together.
So that one was just a little more incidental. It was sort of, the Veers and Vader were very intentionally the first two because there was a disparity between them in points. You have Vader who's very expensive, and you have Veers who's the cheapest non-generic commander for the Imperials. Whereas the Rebel ones are sort of clustered together a little closer in points cost, the Empire has this greater disparity between the high end and the low end. So it was just natural then that players who wanted to include more options or other expensive options in their list would gravitate towards Veers as a commander. If you take Vader, he's the centerpiece of your army. Whereas if you take Veers, something else probably is the centerpiece, so it allows for some of those more expensive units. And that's sort of the Empire in general. There's a lot of disparity there between, like, I mean, their heavy's the most expensive heavy. Boba Fett's more expensive than Chewbacca. And then on the other end, Veers is the cheapest. He's cheaper than Leia. So that wasn't necessarily a synergy that we came up with, the Veers and Boba, but it was just sort of a natural, like, hey, I mean, you can run Boba Vader if you want. You can make that work, but it starts to get a little expensive. You really have to care about your core units and make sure you don't lose those, so you have enough activations. But if you want to pad your activations a little more, you can get instead of one Vader, you can have Veers and Boba. So yeah, that was just sort of a natural thing that occurred for the Imperials.
All right, so since we're at LVO and we have one more high maximum firepower left, what do you think we can expect there and even at high command?
So I don't know. Actually, Kyle might be better posed to answer this question than I am because, like I said, it's cool to see what list people are doing, and I do try and keep track of the top of the meta right now and what people are sort of just discovering, and that's cool to see. But I don't know if I have a great sense of what list is going to take it necessarily. I don't know if I even have necessarily a good Rebel or Imperial guess. So
yeah, and I'll say I'll let Kyle talk to all that, but just from my views yesterday they were all over the place. I didn't there's some that were very similar, but I don't know. I was really good to see the list just span the spectrum.
Yeah, there was a ton of variety yesterday. I'm going to do a full deep dive of all 62 lists.
Which would be awesome.
And how so I think hopefully we'll be able to answer that question in more detail. But at least in the top 6, there was 2 Wonder Twins, Palpatine, a couple more random ones. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but yeah, I expect it will be similar. I guess it depends a lot on, Adepticon is 2 months from now, so I guess it depends on what we get in between now and then.
Which we will.
Yeah.
There will be releases between now and then.
I assume so, unless they all fall off the boat or something in between here in China.
God, I hope not.
Like that unfortunate shipping container to Brazil. But yeah, so I expect it will look a little different, but it should be fairly similar.
All right, well, I think that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
No, man, thank you. It was an honor. It was awesome to be here at LVO, and I think part of the fun certainly is the day after recording some podcasts. So no, I appreciate it. Appreciate the invite, and it's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's a nice, easy thing to do the next morning. Just talk about what happened. So, all right, well, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for listening.